Welcome to tonight's shiur, Motzei Shabbos Parshas Vayeitzei, and we're going now into the Chag HaGeula of the Mitzvah Rebbe. So on Shabbos was the Yom Haledes and the Yortzeit, and today is the Yud, Sunday, is the Chag HaGeula, and the Simcha in Chabad. And so if we go a little bit nostalgia of Farbrengen, so you'll understand where I'm coming from. Okay, so I've been asked to share stories also. That's because it's a Lav Malka atmosphere. So I want to share with you a story, the following. I once got a call, personal story. I got a call, Rabbi, could you please arrange Kaddish on my behalf? So I say, what's the story? My rabbi doesn't want to arrange Kaddish. So I say, was the relative Jewish? She says, no, it was my cat. So I tried to explain to her that as high in Gan Eden as a cat will ever reach, it's reached there already without the Kaddish. Okay. About 2 years later, it's about half an hour before Shabbos, and the phone rings. I pick up the phone and I recognize the voice. This time it's the next cat had died. So let's see. So I asked her, and I started thinking a little bit more about her. And I asked her, do you live alone or do you have a family? So she lives alone, as I had guessed. Right. So then I understood a bit more why the cat was so important to her. She comes home, that's a bit of company, something. I understand a person lives alone. It's some kind of comfort, etc. So I asked her then, do you light candles for Shabbos? So she says, no. So I said, I want to suggest something to you, that today and every Friday before the Shabbos begins, before sunset, you should light a candle. You look at the candle and you'll see the warmth of the candle, and this will remind you of the warm feeling which you had from your cat. And that's as much as I heard from her. So it was just the Hashgacha Pratis that happened to be Erev Shabbos, and it occurred to me this should be the response to her question. Okay. I mentioned this story because I don't know how much you follow the Lubavitch news sites, but I got on Friday, someone sent me a clip, and I now saw it's on anash.org, a whole article, whatever, clip of Rabbi Chaim Dalfin, they use the word rant, about someone who spoke publicly in connection with Yudis Kislev, and he was talking about his petting his cat, and how he's lashing out how it's totally inappropriate. So I'm going to be talking about, in question number 3, about someone who owns a cat. And so before I get lashed at for talking about a chassid who has a cat, so I just wanted to address this. And I can see the difference where the circumstances are. Sometimes people do have an animal, a pet. It could be, in the case I said, if a person's lonely, I can understand that. Sometimes animal therapy. But overall, it needs to be said, as Rabbi Dalvin said, should we say not so eloquently, that it's not a Chassidish thing. A Chassidish thing is that we never had a dog as a member of the family. You read in Chassidish stories, you have the typical poritz sitting there with the dog next to him. That was a very goyish kind of family picture. Although cats seem to be more tolerated in Rabbi Mendel Lieberman managed to get a cat into almost every family scene which he painted. But okay. Also, sometimes people have it for mice, they have them, or a dog for protection. That's a different story. But to kind of adopt an animal as part of your family, that was never a Chassidish minhag. Now, I just want to share with you one more story. And the story is the following. I heard this from Reb Gershon Mendel, a Garelik, Alav Shalom. And the story goes like this. It was shortly after the Second World War, and there was refugees, and there were unfortunately many agunas. It wasn't an aguna, a woman who her husband had died. She had no children, and so there was a need to do a chalitza. Her brother-in-law was there, and before she can remarry, so a woman who's lost her husband and she had never had any children with her husband, so then there's a mitzvah of chalitza or yibum. We don't do yibum nowadays, so it's typically chalitza. Chalitza is a complicated process where there's a special chalitza shoe which is put on the foot or the leg of the brother-in-law, and then the Yavama, the lady, the widow, she has to painstakingly untie the straps from the foot, from the leg of her brother-in-law, and then there's the spitting, etc. And last she says, etc. At any rate, there was a bezdin of 3 rabbanim, 2 of them were Lubavitcher, and one of them was a Litvischer. And there was this chalitza going on, and the woman, the widow, was struggling with untying the straps. So the Litvischer Rov very politely leaned over to help her. And one of the Chassidish Rabbanim, I think it was Reb Shmuel Sasonkin, or was whoever it was, Plotkin, whoever it was, he was horrified because the chalitza has to be done by her. It mustn't be anyone else helping her. So he saw this Dayan helping the woman doing the chalitza. He says, "Du burdiak was du bist." So burdiak is, I'm not familiar with all the colorful words in Russian, but it's not a compliment. And so then there was a whole tumult, Hayitochin, that the Rov called the other Dayan, he called him a burdiak. And someone comes over to him, he says he shouldn't have spoken this way. And he said, if you would have understood what happened there, if you would have, anyway, so I don't know, and the passion which Rabbi Dolphin has on this issue, perhaps I should also have that passion. But just to make it clear that that's not minig anash midoros, from all the generations. And the Indian of having pet dogs, etc., has become, unfortunately, more and more popular in religious circles, and I think it is appropriate to say that it's not Chassidish minig. Someone's on the fringe, okay, but it's not something which is should be seen as a positive development in our community. I think that's enough said. Let's just go on to our agenda, and I'm going to come back to the cat later. Okay, so point number 1 of our list. So if a chutznik visits Eretz Yisroel in this period, after the 7th of Cheshvan, until the 5th of December, whatever, it's this Thursday, I believe. So there's the time where in Eretz Yisroel they switch over and start saying Saint Halamoto, that's after the 7th of Cheshvan, and then we in Chutz wait till around the 5th of December. So what happens if someone from England visits Eretz Yisroel? What does he do then in his Shemona Esrei? And what does he do on his way back, once he's come back home? So you get kind of different answers. Some Rav will tell you that once you've started saying Saint Halamoto, you have to keep on saying it. And others say that you go there and you say it and you come back and you stop. So I'm going to just share with you what we have here in so step by step. We have, well, let's start here. Here's an answer of the Rebbe. The Rebbe refers to the Birka Yosef, and other most Achroinim say that Kol Echad Yinheg Keminig Nusach Mekoim B'Hoive. You follow the practice of where you are currently. So in Eretz Yisroel, you'll say the Saint Halamoto. In Chutz, you'll say the same Brocha. V'chein kosa v'ksos hashulchan. So says the Sos HaShulchan. Okay. Now, so let's go and see this Birkei. He quotes the Birkei Yosef. What you have on the top of the screen is in the Shulchan Aruch, we have a commentary in the margin called the Sharit Shuvah. So here he quotes, because of Birkei Yosef, a Ben Eretz Yisroel, who's in Eretz Yisroel at Zayin Cheshvan, and he started saying V'sein Talamoto. And then he goes to Chutz. So once he started, he shouldn't stop. Now he's talking clearly about a Ben Eretz Yisroel. He's not talking about a Ben Chutz. So again, someone who's in Eretz Yisroel, and he started saying V'sein Talamoto, and he continues. Yes. Okay, that's a little bit different to what we saw over here, but fine. Let's talk about Eretz Yisroel. Now, then the Rebbe referred to the Sos HaShulchan from Chaim Noah. So let's see what he has to say on this topic. Ben Eretz Yisroel, who happens to be in Chutz La'aretz, or Ben Chutz La'aretz happens to be in Eretz Yisroel, he should follow the minig of his local where he is at the moment. He then says, "V'im hischil, if you started just asking in Eretz Yisrael on the 7th of Cheshvan, and then you left the country, left Israel, you should continue Kavnei Eretz Yisrael." See, the impression is he doesn't differentiate whether he is a Ben Chutz La'aretz visiting or Ben Eretz Yisrael who has then left the country. See, that's where it's coming from, that even a Ben Chutz La'aretz who visits Eretz Yisrael and starts saying with Saint Halamotor should continue doing so even as he's come back. Let's go on. Now, this on the screen is the Birkei Yosef itself. So here we have where he says, just follow your local minig, where the minig of where you are. Then we have the next piece, Ben Eretz Yisroel, who is in Eretz Yisroel and starts there, and then he goes to Chutz La'aretz. Since he started, he should continue. So despite him saying, follow the minig of where you are, but once you've started, Ben Eretz Yisroel, he continues to say V'sein Halamot, unless he's the Chazan, obviously. Let's go on. Now, this is from the Piskei Teshuvos. He writes the following. A Ben Chutz La'aretz, who visits Eretz Yisroel, when he's there, he should say Talamoto. When he goes back, he should stop saying Talamoto. And although the Birkei Yosef had said that jumping back and forth is Ichucha B'Tlula, that's on notes of 27, let's go back, we see that lashon here. It shouldn't be just a joke, switching back and forth and back and forth. So the Birkei Yosef, he was referring to a Ben Eretz Yisroel who left the country. But a Ben Chutz La'aretz who visited and came back to his hometown, then he should just say the same bracha. This he quotes from the Divrei Yantziv, that's the Klusenberger Rov, and the Shragameh from Vayeitzei, Schneebal, and Minchas Yitzchok. So he's bringing three contemporary poskim who say that if you've just visited Eretz Yisroel for a few days, whilst you're there saying Talmoto, you come back to a same bracha. Just to add a little bit more to that, if you see that he then quotes V'yesh oimrim. Now those who say that once you started, you should continue saying V'sein Talamotor, not in Birchas Hashonim, but in Shemei Atfilah. And then he should say Kenusach Hanal. What's Kenusach Hanal? He says like this: you're in Chutz La'aretz, you should say V'sein Talamot Livrocho, Be'atzeinu Hakdosho, V'chol HaMekayim Satzichim Lekach. That's rather a long text and a whole new innovation. And it's to be said as Shemei Atfilah. So no one seems to be saying that he should continue saying V'sein Talamotor in Birchas Hashonim. So just to summarize, and that's what we wrote in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, although generally the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is, what we've added is Minhagei Chabad, but based upon this letter of the Rebbe, there was written there, and also this Piskei Teshuvos, that a chutznik who visits Eretz Yisroel, whilst he's there saying V'sein Talamotor, once he leaves the country, he switches back to the same bracha until the end of the week. Right, let's go on. Question about someone asks, is it okay to leave the Negel Vasser bowl with before you go to sleep, to put it under your bed? I can understand the reason for this. I'm sure you've had the incident of children or adults knocking over the Negel Vasser and then you washing your carpet kind of thing. And so it's safer if it's under the bed. The thing is that we know that the Gemara talks about that putting food onto the bed is going to endow them with the Ruach Ra. So does Ruach Ra help for Negel Vasser, or does it? So this is actually, there was a Rov in, where was he? Was it? Perhaps it was in Podovich actually. His name was Rebbe David Rabinovich To'imim. In short, the Yaderes. Great Gaon just over about 100 years ago. And he writes this question. If you kept the water underneath a bed, is that going to help to remove the Ruach Ra, which is required, which is accomplished by washing Negel Vasser in the morning? Because it says in the Gemara that stuff under the bed is has the Ruach Ra. So even though the B'diavad, there are those who say that you don't have to get rid of it, although in that generally we are machmir, by the way. If you had food under the bed, etc., we generally would say don't use it. There are those who are mekel, but perhaps they're not going to be effective in removing the Ruach Ra. So the bottom line remains that we don't leave the Negel Vasser bowl with the fresh water under the bed because of the concern of it acquiring Ruach Ra. It's not going to be much use for Negel Vasser in the morning. So that remains. Okay, so here the next piece, actually, the story with the cat is a fascinating shaila. So the story is like this. This young man or middle-aged man lives alone in a small flat. And he has a cat. And he's concerned that when he goes out of the flat on Shabbos and he closes the door, he's effectively trapping the cat in the apartment and is doing an issur of capturing an animal, which you're not allowed to capture an animal on Shabbos. This was his question. Now, I think it's a very good question because, as you can see at the bottom over here, he saw a Shulchan Aruch. It says chosul dinoi kishar chaya, that a cat has got a din of another chaya. So that's where he's coming from, and that's why he was concerned. Is he doing something wrong by closing the door when he leaves the house? So, so this is in Siman Shin Tes Zayin. And it talks about domesticated animals. And he differentiates. He says the following: Chaya v'oif. If you have what would be called a wild animal, an animal of the wild, doesn't mean a fierce animal, a deer, for example. If you've got your pet deer in your house or a bird, you breed deer in your house or in your chutz, or you've got geese, you've got chickens, you've got doves. If you would now, let's say you've got in your house, or in your garden, you've got these animals, and you then trap them. So he says you're potter. You're not guilty of trapping. Now here's a fascinating explanation. He says they are already trapped. If they were doves which live in the attic or something, no, they are more. And they are more free birds. But here, look at the lashon here. Mash'enken, they are birds which are bred in the house, since by nightfall they're going to come back to their cage, and then when they come at night, it'll be easy to catch them. Because when they come home at night, then they're not going to run away. They want to have their supper or their bed. Therefore, even when they're not in the cage a whole day, they're not considered free animals. Yeah, fascinating explanation here. Since when nightfall comes, they will be easy to trap. Therefore, even during the day when they are at large, trapping them is not awesome in HaTorah. Right. But then he says, midrabon or midivrei soifrim, you're not allowed to. What would that mean? To chase one of these animals or birds, and to chase them into a narrower place where it'll be easy to catch them, then that would be also midrabanan. So again, the animal is at large in your yard, and then if you chase it into a narrow spot where it's now going to be easy to catch it without any effort, without any agility, that's considered trapping. He then goes on and says, "Bamedvar mamurim." Then he goes on. He says, sorry, he differentiates. This is only chayav v'oif, but behemoths, as in cows and sheep and goats, for example, and perhaps a donkey would also go into this kind of category. Perhaps a horse also. Perhaps even a dog might come into this category. Animals which are gedalim, but more domestic animals, which are gedalim b'reshus shel odom, then you are allowed to trap them, even b'reshus rabim. So if your sheep has gone for walkies in the street, and you go in and you manage to catch it, has on a lead, or you put a lead on a string on it, and you bring it home, you're not guilty of trapping. It's so domestic that it's not begeder trapping. But the chayav ha'oif, because their nature, they're more free birds or free animals, and although they are domesticated somewhat, but to narrow them into a small spot, that's considered trapping. On this, the Shulchan says, "V'chosol dina k'shar chayo," that in this respect, a cat is considered more like a deer or like a bird, that it's not mekabel maris. It's more elusive than more elusive than a sheep or a cow, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to trap it into a narrow spot, unless, as it was discussed before. So therefore, the question is a very good question. To somehow chase a cat into a narrow spot would be an osir midrabanan. So now he's asking the question, what about closing the door? So now, earlier in that simon talks about closing the door. It talks about in the Gemara, Bryce, if your door was left open and a deer ran into your house, and of course it said, "Oh dear," yeah, of course. And then you closed the deer on the deer. By the way, in German, the word for animal is Tier, yeah, Tiergarten in Berlin I saw once. So all right, so if you close the door on the deer on Shabbos, you'd be guilty of trapping. Then it goes into detail. What happens if there's one already trapped and someone else sits next to him? It doesn't matter. That's. But meanwhile, we have here that closing a door is considered trapping. So therefore, his question, a good question. If you're not allowed to trap, not allowed to trap the cat, is closing the door on the cat considered trapping? So two things. So now the Mishnah Berurah says, this is the Mishnah Berurah Halocho, it's earlier on in the Simon, and he says that the Isur would only be when it's in a narrow spot, if it's a bias godel, if it's a large space, or it's a bird which is already used to your place, where it's only Isur Drabonon, to narrow on it. Yesh loimed kaigavno legozral psichas hadeles achei shekvar nitzed ksas pam achas. He said, quotes from the Pri Megadim, that the animal which is in Mela, what we said before, narrowing it into a narrow spot, that it would be also midrabanon. But closing a door is not as chomer. That's the Mishnah Berurah says it's okay. So number one, it's okay, yeah, because he said that closing the door is not a direct engagement with the animal to trap it. Therefore, he says it's okay. And then I want to share with you one more thing, which I found also as doing research, and that is from the Chelkas Yoyov. So the Chelkas Yoyov lived in Poland pre-war. Koch sich stark in Alter Rebbe. I remember Rabbi Mentlik quoting him in his shiurim. Possibly he had even met him in pre-war Europe. At any rate, he says the following. You open the door and you're standing in the door. At that moment, the animal is not free to run out because you're standing in the way. And therefore, when you close the door, you haven't wrapped, because when the door was closed from before Shabbos, the animal was how do you say, was restrained. Yeah, whatever restraint it is, but it was restrained. When you open the door, it's not as if the animal's at liberty to run away because you're in the way. Therefore, it hasn't been set free, and therefore the fact that you close the door, you haven't restrained it because it was restrained the whole time. That's how he comes up with the second, with his explanation with the Magen Avraham. So therefore, on two counts, I would say this fellow is allowed to leave his house. Number one, the Mishnah says that closing the door is not a problem for an animal which is free within the house. And number two, the fact that you're standing at the door is also means it was never released, and therefore it's not a problem to close the door. Had you had let's say, the summer, you'd left the back door open, and the animal was free to run into the garden and come back in, and then before you leave for Shal Shudas, whatever you got to shul, and you close the doors, then that could be, according to the Chelkas Yoyov, that wouldn't be a solution. Whereas according to Mishnah Berurah, that would still be okay. Yeah. I think I once discussed a couple of years ago a different story about a neighbor of mine who has rabbits. They have a hutch and rabbits. And in this part of the world, we also have foxes. And the foxes will sometimes take a rabbit for supper, and it wouldn't come back. So they wanted to know whether they're allowed to close the hutch on Shabbos, not so much to trap the rabbits, but to protect the rabbits from being preyed upon by the fox. Okay, let's see what we have in the hatch. In the chat. Wasps and bees. Okay. I'm not sure about the Morristown thing. Okay. Let's move on. So, yeah, all right. Let's leave those questions closer to Sukkot, yeah? About wasps and bees. That's when they become popular. Okay. Let's move on. The next question on our sheet is, can I hang up on a sheet, a chart with Vayeitzei b'Nesua Oron and bריך Shmei on the inside of the door of the Oron Kodesh, which actually, by the way, in Stamford Hill, we have that on the downstairs shul. I picked up once at the Kinus HaShluchim such a chart, and I hung it up without thinking too much about it. But someone asked me the question, is it okay or not? Well, now, we are restricted. We don't put anything in the Oron Kodesh. It's only things which are very, appropriate to be put in the Oron Kodesh. So let's say in the Litvische world, they have the Megillus of Yeshaya and Yirmiyah for Haftorah. Would those Megillus be put in the Oron Kodesh? And I believe their practice is not to. The Oron Kodesh is just for the Sefer Torah. All right, the silverware goes with the Sefer Torah, but to put other stuff in the Oron Kodesh is not so okay. So here's a question. When the fellow was honored with Psichas Oron, he goes over with his siddur and he puts it down inside the Oron. Is that okay? And the answer is that in this respect, whatever is makubal, whatever is normal behavior, so we're going to use a principle that when it was consecrated allowing that kind of usage. So if it's normal for a person to go for psich and put a siddur in the Oron Kodesh, so for that is an allowance for that. And so by the same token, to put up a chart with bריך Shmei, since I think it's a fairly common thing, it's not worse than the siddur, so I think that's okay. I once was giving a drasha and I was standing by the bimah, and I put my hat on the bimah. And someone came over to me afterwards and says, you shouldn't be putting your hat on the bimah, because the bimah is designated for the Sefer Torah. It's true that we put on the bimah, sometimes we put Sforim, we sometimes have a tzedakah pushka on the bimah. That's true. But that's because that's normal. Therefore, you can say Lev Beis Demasne. It was consecrated, and this was allowed. But it was never consecrated. And well, people can put their hats on the bim. Sorry, it was never. It's actually quite disrespectful besides. But it wasn't consecrated for this with this allowance. Therefore, it remains no. It's not allowed to put a hat on on a bima which is designated for the Sefer Torah and with the allowances for the more common usages. Okay, let's move on. What do we have now? So here's a story that, as I said, for those who came late, today is Yud Kislev, and really it should be Farbrengen. And therefore, I said, if I go a little bit out of line, you'll have to forgive me in the context of a Farbrengen. I did not say L'chaim tonight because that's already going a bit too far to give Hashir and Halocha after having L'chaim. So forgive me on that also. So, with the Friedrich habe gesagt, ich bin azevi noch maschke. So, okay. So now we have a question was the following. A fellow went to a Sheva Brochos. It's not in England, another country. And it was a family Sheva Brochos, and he was dismayed that there was no mechitza. He was upset, but he didn't say anything. But it came to benching. They offered him to bench. They offered him to do one of the Sheva Brochos, and he declined. So then, just last week, there's a weekly one of these shul leaflets called Alim Letrufa. I'm not sure which crowd it is. I think it's Bells or something. At any rate, they have there a column about halacha stuff, and it talks there about declining Sheva Brochos. So here you have a din Siman Reish Aleph, which says the following. Yeah, this is from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, no chidushim there. An oirich who's been given the honor of benching, and he declines. That is mechitza yomov, his shortening his days, because he has declined to give the bracha to the Balabayis. And Balabayis is the offspring of Avraham. And it says, Vavorchem avorchecha. So if you bless the offspring of Avraham, so you also get a blessing. And from the positive, you get the negative. So if you decline to give a bracha to the Balabayis, so you're missing out in bracha. Put it that way. So that's about benching. And in benching, there's a Birchas Balabayis. What about Sheva Brochos? It's not a bracha to the Balabayis, but it's a bracha to other Yidden. Within part of the Sheva Brochos is bracha to the Mesubim, etc. So by declining, so is it wrong to decline? So there may be something they say that they take the view it's the same thing. Whatever bracha if you decline giving a bracha to Yidden, it is an issue. But I want to look more at the other side. Yeah, I want to look at this issue when he had a discomfort because of the lack of a mechitza. So let's take a look. This is from the Levush. Now, this is not in the Shulchan Aruch. In the Levush is I'll say that's Shulchan Aruch, but the end of the volume of Arachaim, he's got Likutim, and this is where it is. So that's where you can find it. The end of Arachaim in the Levush, in Likutim, in Hogim, whatever he calls it. Yeah, but he says here that Sheva Brochos you have to have at least 10 people, 10 men, as we have the story with Boyaz, and it was for Birchas Chason. Then he quotes from the Sefer Chassidim, wherever there's men and women seeing one another, like at a Sudas Nisuin, at a marriage wedding meal, one should not say that there's joy in his abode, referring to Hashem, because she'ein simcha lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheyesh bo hirhurei aveira. There is no joy before Hashem when there are thoughts of aveira, when there are inappropriate thoughts. Adkan. So this is what he's quoting from the Sefer Chassidim. That one cannot say, and this is it's a well-known thing. You can't say Shasim Chabemoine. We'll come to this more in detail later. The Levush then says, "Ve'ein is horin achshav v'zeh." Nowadays, this is 400 years ago, a bit more. That people are not particular about that. Ve'efshe mishum de'achshav mergolos hanoshim harbe beinu hanoshim. It could be because nowadays women tend to be amongst men much more than they used to be. Ve'ein kan hirhuri alvera kolkach, and therefore the inappropriate thoughts are not so much there. Then he says, "Dedamyon alon kaka kechivri." Now there's a story in the Gemara, I think, with the Yochanan, and they said he picked up the color, and he said how you could do that. As he says, to me, it's like a white goose. That's the kaka kechivri. He has no lewd thoughts. So he says that possibly the fact that because the social interactions have changed, the style has changed, therefore there's not so much hirur as there used to be. Because the lifestyle has changed, there's much more mingling than there used to be. The cave and the doshu, once it's become people have trampled on it. In other words, it's become used to it. So the Levush actually, whilst he's quoting the Sefer Chassidim, but he himself is a little bit forgiving. Yeah, right. So why don't I share that with everyone? Okay, but let's move on. Now we have here two other quotes. One is from the Rebbe, and the one above on the top is from the Chofetz Chaim. So we'll go first to Chofetz Chaim, but just to flash back, we know that the Rebbe had a major milchama in a major campaign to insist on having mechitzas, bechasanas. Came to America, and the mantra of America is Anders, and so they didn't have mechitzas. And the Rebbe pushed very hard, and sometimes it's very difficult because you're talking about families from not, Balat Shuva, etc. And there's been a lot of struggles for people to have a chasna with a mechitza, and people have pushed to keep to that standard. And okay, and so let's take a look here. First of all, here from the Chofetz Chaim. This is Chofetz Chaim has got a sefer called Ahavas Chesed, and he writes here that it refers to the Bach. The earlier part was about mixed dancing, where he's really lashing out heavy, and then he quotes the Bach in Even Ezer, quoting from Minhagim. When there's a chuppah, men and women in the same room, one should not say Hasimcha b'moinoi, because there's no simcha when the Yetzer Hara is governing. And then he quotes also Beis Shmuel and Birchei Yosef, says that it's already written in the Sefer Chassidim, and what we just saw. And then he quotes Sefer Chassidim in another place. Don't when it says Aus tisbach masula b'mochil on her own. Okay, so this is the Chofetz Chaim quoting from the Bach of the importance of not having men and women together in the same room, because then you can't say Shasim Chabemayne. Now, in Shulchan Menachem, which is a sefer which is put together most of the Rebbe's letters on Halocha and Minhag, so now there's 3 letters about this topic. One is a longer letter, but I'm just going to read this shorter one. You've written that you've been told, this is someone has written to the Rebbe, you've been told that in the reference to the mingling of men and women by a chasana, al pi halacha, it's only an issue about saying shasimcha b'moinoi. But other than that, it's not a problem. And those who make a fuss about the main thing of the mingling, so then it's only al pi chassidus, and you shouldn't be imposing this on everyone. So this is the person's challenge to the need for a mechitza, etc. The Rebbe writes, Muvenes, it's obvious. I'm so surprised what you're saying. How can you say such a thing? Because the reason why don't you say simcha b'meinai? That is because the Eibishter does not have a simcha when there's a Yetzer Hara is governing. And the governing of the Yetzer Hara is something. Is any Yid is allowed? We say it's only very to people it's a problem for, but other people it's okay. But is there a heter for other people to engage with Yetzer Hara freely? The Rebbe also in the long letter talks about he writes to parents who they were insisting not to have a mechitza. He says the mechitza brings simcha b'ma'inoi, and then that simcha brings simcha to the chas and kala, and for the rest of their life, for the next few decades, they'll be married Be'ezus Hashem, so they will have a greater measure of simcha. And you want to sacrifice that simcha for all the rest of their lives for what? For an indulgence for which is going to last for a few hours. And because of pressure from neighbors, etc. Call upon him. So I just want to also address you hear sometimes people say, you know what, we'll put up the mechitza just for the Sheva Brochos. So, and that's a bit of a nonsense. Is it a simcha b'mayna or not? If you realize that it's not appropriate for the whole meal, not just to become frum when it comes to benching. So coming back to the question, yes. So is there an issue of declining to declining to say Sheva Brochos, there may be something, yes, there may be something negative about this. But on the other hand, if he felt so uncomfortable because there's no mechitza, I think he was justified in declining. That's I think is right. Right. There's an expression in Yiddish, "Zok de Schnur and made the Schwiger." You're talking to one person, you mean someone else. So we're discussing this, and there are people out there who some will listen, and Be'ez Hashem will take it to heart and be more careful about it. Right. Now, someone asked me the following question. This is point number 6. And if someone had missed Musaf, so it says you cannot, if you missed Mincha, you'd have to daven twice. Ma'ariv, if you missed Musaf, they say you can't make it up later. Why? Because it's corresponding to Karbonis. If you ask, well, aren't all the Shachas, Mincha, and Ma'ariv all corresponding to Karbonis? So why is Musaf different? So he had read it in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and I looked up in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Is a little bit more explained. So let's read here. You can see it on the screen, and that is from Sim Kuf Ches. It says here the following. Now you know that Musaf l'chatchila you should daven before 1 hour after Chatzos, but b'diavad you could daven Musaf a whole day, and if you daven Mincha you can still daven Musaf, yeah. But then he says if the whole day has passed and you didn't daven Musaf, you cannot make up for it because when you're going to read the Musaf with the Karbonis, but the Karbonis you have the idea of as mane batul Karbonis. Once the time has passed, you cannot compensate for the missed Karbonis. And the Karbonis of the Musaf, the 7 Brochos of Musaf, is Mishal Maporim Sosenu, to offer our through our lips instead of the bulls. We're going to offer with our lips, and in this respect is Ovo as mane batul Karbonis. By other tefillas, they are not just to make up for the missing Karbonis. Other tefillas is Bakoshas Rachamim, and Bakoshas Rachamim can be any time. So the other tefillas, other prayers can be done any time of the day, and therefore you missed one, you can make up for it later. Whereas Musaf is very much related just for the Karbonis rather than Rachamim, and therefore if you missed the slot, unfortunately you cannot make it up later. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the next question, and that is, someone was at the Kinus and he put down his hat somewhere and came back, he found a different hat. And so now it looked very similar to his. So is he allowed to wear someone else's hat instead of who we're guessing is wearing his hat? So the way you read it in Shulchan Aruch is simply that's not okay, yeah? So it has here, mission is chalful, you went to Beis Oval, Beis Hamishte, and you took off a garment and you left it and you hanged it up, and then you come back and someone else has taken yours and they've left theirs. You should not use the exchange, even if the other one is using yours, because you're a Gazlan. And even he's a Gazlan, but you're a Gazlan in a Gazlan. So that's the way it's described in Shulchan Aruch. Having said that, contemporary Sforim are more lenient on this, and they say a couple of arguments. He says nowadays things are different in the respect that clothes are the kind of thing which you can buy them very easily. It's not like in times bygone people made their own clothes, or they had them made tailor-made, and so it's my garment. It's not the same as your garment, yeah. And it's much more personalized. Nowadays, I think they're easy to replace, and there's not much difference between my shirt and your shirt, so to speak. And on that's one basis to say that nowadays you would be allowed to. And he has a second thing he says that they are done, that the assumption is that the one who made the switch will not be makpid if you wear his garment. So if someone took your talis, he wouldn't be makpid if you wore his talis. So these two arguments come together, and so the answer would be given nowadays that you are allowed to wear that hat, and if time comes and the person claims his hat, so then you'll sort it out. By the way, it does help to put a sticker with your name and telephone number or email and stick it inside your hat and avoid this kind of problem. Right. There's something also called a tracker, and but then can you wear a tracker on Shabbos? That we discussed at a shiur about 3 years ago. Okay, let's move on. What's number 7? No, that was number 7. It says number 6. What's number 7? Okay, so here's a question. I was preparing a ksuba, and I realized I'd spelt the word shmoinim with a vav, but I see that it should be spelt without a vav. So I was just intrigued. What's the point of spelling it one way or the other? So this is from the Pischei Tshuva. So where would you find the details of how to write names of places and names of the dates, etc.? So you have in his Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Gittin. So in Even HaEzer Siman Kuf Chavav. So we have here in the Pischei Tshuva, he brings from the Ponim Iris that the word Shmoinim should be written Choser, should be written without a vav, because in the Mesorah you can see that the majority of the word Shmoinim comes up in Tanakh, it's written without a vav. And there are more rights in Siman Kuf Chav Tes that something which is written in the Torah, in Tanakh, sometimes it's with a vav, without a vav, with a yud, without a yud. So you go according to the Rov. So the same thing could be like how you spell Pinchas, etc. So this would be the rule of thumb, as we'd say, would go according to the majority of the way it's written in the Torah. Now this is interesting because the Tanakh is written as if someone is whispering behind your ear, and telling you what the vowels are. Very many words without vowels, you wouldn't read them correctly, and yet that's the way they're written in Tanakh, with the assumption that there's a companion, a Torah Shebal Peh or Malamed, has taught you how to. All right, but that's the way it's written. I'm just thinking perhaps also the word without a vowel, shmeinim means fat, geschmack, could be there's something in that also, derech haremes. Okay, how are we doing for time? Okay, what else do we have here? So someone asked me on the end of the week that in recordings we hear the Rebbe putting the dot before bechemla. So that's in Moide Ani lefonecho melech chai v'kayim shehechzarto bi nishmosi bechemla rabba monosecho. So we all know about the dot after bechemla. That there's a whole story of the Rebbe Rashab and his brother, and one asked the other, why is there a dot before Rabbi Monosecho? The Razo asked his younger brother, the Rebbe Rashab, who was about 5 years old, and the younger brother said, because we have to take the Monosecho, the dot, and you have to spread it through the whole day. Something on those lines. Okay. But the simple thing is that if not for that dot, the word Rabbo could mean Chemlo Rabbo, in great compassion, or Rabbi Monosecho, that your trustworthiness is great. So in order to clarify that the Rabbo is describing Monosecho, therefore there's a dot before the word Rabbo. But he's asking that the Rebbe would say, Shechazati binishmosi bechemlo. Shechazati binishmosi bechemlo, as if there's a comma before the word bechemlo. So the answer is very simple. The bechemlo is not referring to the nishmosi bechemlo. It's referring to Shechzarto. You've restored my neshama with compassion. So Shechzarti bi bechemlo. What did you return? My neshama. So, but there's as if there ought to be a comma after Shechzarti minishmosi. How so? It's describing that verb of Shechzarti minishmosi is with chemlo. So simple. That's just the way the trop should be. Now, the final thing which we have on our list is I got into a whole minefield because I was talking about the bracha on rice, and then I told a story last week, Rabbi Shmotkin, Rabbi Chadakov, if you remember, and then I rambled on into the bracha on rice cakes. I said the bracha on rice cakes is Hadomo, and then rambled further and said, what about the bracha on Rice Krispies? And I shared with you this from this sefer called Sharia Bracha, and he says that Rice Krispies are, well, according to Mishnah Berurah, is Mazonos, and according to us it will be Shahakal. Why? Because it goes through a stage of cooking in between. So he differentiates between rice cakes, which are just popped rice and Rice Krispies, which go through a stage of cooking in between. And then something, that light bulb moment, if you want to call it, then if that's the case, then we have a problem with Bishul Akum. And I mentioned about Pringles. So here we are. So this is from a sefer called Bishul Yisroel, a very contemporary sefer, and he talks about Pringles, and he says it's a snack made from potatoes. He says, L'choire, if it is made from potato powder, which is made by Goyim, and then the Pringles are made by Goyim, you should be machmir even if though you make on potato chips, because once they're cooked, then becomes maybe once the potatoes are cooked, so the mashed potato is edible as it is, so therefore it's already bishul akum. And so then the fact that you then made it into Pringles, what happened to the issur? So this is what I shared with you last week. I shared it from memory. I didn't see. I'd heard about this, and that Pringles need to be bishul Yisrael. So now, if that's the case, then now I have the same problem with Rice Krispies. So this same sefer, Bishul Yisrael, he writes the following. He writes, Rabbi Shmuel Felder tells him that the way the rice is made, Rice Krispies, they don't cook the rice. They just soak it in water, and then they throw them into a hot chamber. And of course, in that form, it's not olal shulchan malachim, it's not a choshev food. So he says it's not cooked. So now we have a machlokas between Rabbi Felder and Lahavdil Rabbi Google, Rabbi Wikipedia, who says that the milled rice is then cooked in large industrial cookers with water and a lightly sweetened malt flavoring. This cooking softens the rice, making it easier to puff later on. So it's not machlokas b'metzias. What exactly happens? Does the rice get cooked in the process? Now, so let's step back a bit. We have the soif ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. I have a long process, and the end of the process will be a food which is going to be a breakfast cereal. It's not going to be olal shulchan malachim. But in the middle, there's going to be a stage is going to be olal shulchan malachim. So do we look at the full picture, or do we say no? Well, at a given moment, halfway through the process, it was olal shulchan malachim, although no one had intended to do that. So I gave this over last night. Actually, we have on Friday night after Ma'ariv. I share a few of these points from the shiur. So someone said to me, Rav Padve has an interesting proof to be made. There is a haloch in Shulchan Aruch about butter, about goyshe butter. Now goyshe butter, is the lashon of the Shmechaber is ein limchus b'yad mekilim. Goyshe butter, I'm not talking about nowadays, because nowadays they've got additives. But back in the day, so goyshe butter was just, since it cannot be made from any other milk other than cow's milk, therefore it's goyshe butter was considered okay. The goyshe butter was first from milk. When it was milk, it became bachal vacuum. So then they made the milk into butter. So what? But the time when it was milk, at the same time that which you had before, where was it? Apparently, that's not so obvious. Since there's a plan to make it into butter, therefore the interim stage doesn't seem to be such an issue. So if so, you could use the same argument here with the Bishul Akum story and say, since the cooking of the rice is only an interim stage, and then the intention of the whole process is to end off with a breakfast cereal, which is not a choshev food, and therefore not Bishul Akum, so the cooking in the middle doesn't matter. All right, I'm ready to give you that. But now I'm going to ask you like this. When it comes to Bishul Akum, you've said you've ignored the middle stage. But it came to the Broch, you said, no, it's not Hadama. It's Soif Ma'aseh no. There you've said that the Rice Krispies is not the same bracha as the. Let's go through this again. Why is the rice cakes? Why are they Hadama? We say like this. The Gemara says that rice is bracha mezainis, oires the bracha mezainis. Why is that? Because the entire populations, this is their staple food. Rice is their staple food. But in the rice cake form in popped rice. That's not the norm of these populations, and therefore it remains adama like popcorn. That's why I said last week. So now the same thing can be said with Rice Krispies. That it's not a normal food, not a stable food. I'm not talking about breakfast. I'm talking about as a proper meal. So now, was is the Zogan? It went through an interim stage of cooking, but for Mishal Akim, you ignore the interim stage, and you said you're allowed to eat it. So why, when it comes to the brocha, are you saying the mid interim stage changes its brocha? Yeah, this is my contention that the solution, which or whatever the position which this Sheva Brochos is saying, why he says it's mezoinus, or according to Chabad it would be shahakal, that doesn't fit with the heta which is given as far as having to have Bishul Yisrael. That's my headache for the moment, and thank you for allowing me to share it with you. I'm going to stop here. Wish you all good tavoch and a chag geula in isvaduyas peilos, sorry, and we just go from this geula to the geula shlema of Mashiach Tzidkenu, and Eliyahu should already be mevaseh the geula here of Yameinu. Amen.
Thank you, Shabbat Tov.
Good tavoch.